Hi there, everyone. Thomas Lancaster here. Welcome to this look at creating academic research in the age of generative artificial intelligence. Uh, this originally started out as a case study for my academic integrity in STEM module. It's a module available to students from across Imperial College London, where we quite uniquely look at academic integrity research in a way that's suitable for undergraduate students. But there was a bit of interest in this when I posted it online, so I've decided to make a wider video rather than just restrict it to my own students. And you'll also see an example of a research paper I've created along the way. It's very much a session about research integrity in this age of ChatGPT and generative AI. Now, here's a little background as to where this came from. I posted a tweet that I'd identified some slightly dodgy looking research papers on Google Scholar, and I'd largely reversed engineered how this large number of papers were being put together. And I was asked, could I do a video showing this? Well, I did try and do a video showing this, and I have a partial video, but it turned out to take longer than expected, mainly not because of the process of doing the research, but because of various technical hitches along the way in terms of laying out the information how I wanted it on a page, other things I haven't considered. Luckily, though, those videos that I made have enabled me to grab some screenshots that I'll share with you during this presentation. But I was quite surprised to find, as I went through this process, and as I came up with this idea, that there are a lot of papers, particularly in the medical field, doing a comparison with ChatGPT and something else against different search terms there. And this is an example of the type of thing you might find here. Head-to-head comparison of ChatGPT versus Google search for medical knowledge acquisition, published in Wiley Online Library. ChatGPT versus Google for queries related to dementia and other cognitive decline, comparison of results. And there's another one, benchmarking large language models for myopia care, comparing different versions of ChatGPT and Google Bard. Now, this is not saying that any of these authors here are doing anything at all suspect, but there are certainly some authors who seem to be publishing large numbers of papers in generally medical research. This is not unique to medical research, using techniques similar to this. And there's perhaps a bit of suspicion there could be not only acknowledging ChatGPT, but use of ChatGPT hidden away inside these papers. In fact, the story how I came up with this is in the tweet, is that I found somebody who had published more than 50 papers on plagiarism, had also published a review naming themselves as the most published author on plagiarism over a 20-year period as a result of that, and I'd completely missed this body of work entirely. A lot of them were plagiarism in the medical field. This person has also published hundreds of other medical papers, including ones using this particular technique. And there's a question here about how realistic is it that these people are publishing papers almost on a couple of times a week, perhaps more, depending how you interpret this, even when they're multiple authored for that. And again, this may be quite realistic. Not all these papers, by the way, are peer-reviewed. There are preprints in there, various other things. There are reviews and letters and responses making up the numbers. But it does seem quite interesting to me that this is happening. So I said I would try and film myself recording this video, but actually there is so much stop and start with prompts in ChatGPT that didn't work completely first time around, and LaTeX code, because I decided to use LaTeX even though I normally try and avoid it, just to see if that would speed up laying out the final academic paper where the code had errors and I had to go away and find and debug this, that it really took me 6.5 hours, and the last half hour of that was trying to get this in the format needed to upload it to a preprint site. So luckily I did take bits of videos along the way, so I've got some screenshots of how I did this to share, but I think this works much better as a post-analysis. And I could certainly, now I have a structure, complete this again in, I would guess, much more like 4 hours as a human-led process. And I suspect if I chose to automate much more of it than I have done with things like web scraping, then most of this could be done in an hour. The other note is that personally, I will show you a paper. It has got machine generated text in there, but it's got a lot of human edited text as well, and it does acknowledge the use of ChatGPT because I want it to be as I wanted to acknowledge this as best I could, bearing in mind this may not always happen in real life. I also slightly changed the goalposts here. So rather than looking at a Google search and comparing it with ChatGPT, I'm comparing a Quora search against ChatGPT. Quora is a question answering site. People post their questions. Lots of people post their answers to it. And I've restricted this to 10 questions from Quora and simulated Quora search on ChatGPT and 10 questions and answers from that simulated search. All these searches and everything in ChatGPT is using ChatGPT running GPT version 4, which is the paid version, which is deliberate because I needed access to the coding side of ChatGPT as well for some of this there, and then to do some comparisons. Now, the other decision I made was not to do a paper in a medical field because I don't feel qualified. I would not want to be responsible for putting out dangerous misinformation out there, because some of these papers I've looked at, there's a big mismatch in the information between the abstract and the final paper, and perhaps these will be taken as factual, and I wouldn't want that to be the case. So here's the paper I ended up with. The gig's up, how ChatGPT stacks up against Quora on gig economy insights. There is a disclaimer that I will show you afterwards, and the abstract was entirely handwritten based on the information in the paper. ChatGPT did generate an abstract before it did anything else, and it didn't bear much resemblance to the final paper. As you might expect, I could have generated one, but sometimes it's actually quicker, and I prefer the results just to write things for myself for that. And if you do want to see the whole paper, let me just zoom in a little bit. There's a bit of a disclaimer I'll come to at the bottom, and there's a little bit of a literature view. We've got tables of results. Got a series of themes here. We've got a mapping of questions against themes. Got a comparison of the different themes here, and discussion, particularly discussing how Quora and ChatGPT approach answers in these different themes, and some conclusions where I've also said a little bit about the use of this as a method in general. And there's about 8 references. I did slip in one of my own papers. That's about as close as I get to anything about Quora here, written with a former student, Rachel Gupta, as well. But generally, these are just papers I found online. There's the final thing. Only got 16 pages, a reasonable length for a paper. If I was to do this for real, because I could publish using this method for real if it was acknowledged, then there'd be a bit more checking involved, of course. And there'll be a bit more of a literature review, because I think that's a little bit short, and probably expand the methodology section a bit. Perhaps a few more limitations, but everything that's needed is there. So let me go back to the slides here. And I'll just show you the starting point. This is LaTeX, just a way of laying out the text. I'm a terrible LaTeX, programmer or writer. I use Word in general, but I thought it'd make things easier to use, so I set up a quick structure about this. You can see my working title here as well, and just some headings for that. This is everything here will be overwritten by the time we get to the end of the document. And first thing I did, I'm going to go through this relatively quickly to show you the process here, was to go away and find some sources. So on the right of this window, you can just see my bib file. It's just these sources. I think I had 7 at the time because I slipped in my own source later on here. So they can just be very quickly added to the text and laid out. And separately, I just took the site the LaTeX tag, which becomes a citation, and the abstract from each paper, and loaded it up into a text document. Now, if I wanted good information for a literature review, then I could just summarize the papers first, or grab some of the results from the paper, or something more from the abstract. But I did this partly because this was a quick process, and partly as well because would be automatable and scrapable if I was choosing to produce papers like this en masse. So then I went over to ChatGPT and I typed in a prompt. I said it was a helpful research assistant and we're collaborating to write a paper. I didn't give it a particularly good description for this, and I said we needed an introduction, and I gave it the LaTeX tags and the papers and the abstract details. And it generated me an abstract I didn't ask for, and it generated me text, which I copied into LaTeX, as you can see here, and with a few error messages there because the citation format was very slightly wrong, and there are a few things I had to go away and correct as I went through, but this would give you a bit of an idea about how this went, and had an introduction. Now, I rewrote at the end of the process quite a bit of that introduction. The things it didn't like were silly things like Q&A here, that you have to escape the and symbol in that by putting a forward slash, I think it is, in front of it. That I used ChatGPT and then just a traditional way of web searches to find out some of these things. In the end, I just got rid of the Q&A and left this as question and answer site or question and answer platforms. So you can see where the problem with the formatting is over at the right. But I got enough of the introduction together. I had a partial abstract there, very quick, worked in all of these papers for that. There were other things I changed at the end as well, like there are silly layout things to do with the way it lays out citations I had to change, but that's different. Now, I found out that we really need to do these searches from an incognito window. You can't do a Quora search from an incognito window without being logged in. And I didn't want to be logged in because the problem with that is that the results are then biased by the things I've searched for before. So instead, I changed the method slightly, and so long as the methodology matches what I actually did, then it looks like I planned to do this all along by doing a search of Google, gig economy Quora. In fact, I changed that, I think, to sitequora.com, but this is an earlier screen grab of that. And it comes up with all the questions, and you just go through these, you open it up in the other window and copy and paste the question and copy and paste the answer, or the first part of the answer where it got very long, into a file. And then ChatGPT was asked to take the questions and the partial answers and to turn it into a neatly formatted table with LaTeX code. Now, this is the final version of this because it turned it into a table. It wasn't properly formatted, and it overlapped pages and all kinds of things. So again, I had to go and do some rework of this. I've now got the structure if I wanted to do another paper that would make it much faster. The other thing I found is it didn't actually copy the answer across, the partial answer. It for some reason decided it would summarize every answer, which turned out, I think, to be a good thing for the layout of the final paper, because the partial answers didn't read very well for that. But it wasn't what I originally intended, but of course the methodology in the paper suggests it was. And this is a case when actually the accidental result is better than the original planned result. But the paper has this table with the 10 questions and the partial answer, well, the summarized answers, to show what happened there. So we're now probably an hour and a half into this process because these things took a while, including copying the information across and trying to have it make sense there. The next stage was to do the ChatGPT simulation, and all these new chats are done in new windows to avoid biasing the chat with the previous results here. And this did also take a bit of trial and error to get a prompt which wouldn't automatically be rejected by ChatGPT, but it came across act as if you're a simulation of the Google search engine. You're being accessed using an incognito window. Complete a search for the term gig economy with results restricted to Quora.com. Identify the first 10 results returned. Display a table with the 10 questions along with a summary of the top answer to that question, and then various things to ask it not to tell me it is not really the Google search engine and everything like that. And the reason I asked for a table here rather than LaTeX code, incidentally, is because I determined by then that despite my best intentions of laying this all out in LaTeX, that it was getting the code so wrong that it would actually be quicker for me to just copy those questions into the structure that I'd got working before. But now we have the 10 questions. They're different to the ones that I received through my real search, and I don't see this in the paper, but of course there is a different time period cutoff for when ChatGPT or OpenAI has scraped the web and collected this data. But generally, they're reasonably in sync. The analysis will show some subtleties later on. It actually did a pretty good job. So then I just decided, well, I'll just copy my LaTeX code to work from here, and I gave it back all 20 questions and the summarized answers. The format is here, and then this and symbol separates the different cells within the table here. That's why the and symbol caused problems earlier on when we wrote Q&A. But I just asked it to suggest a series of categories to allow us to group and compare the questions, and I said the question could fit in to more than one category, and to give this as a description. I also asked it to format it as LaTeX. It sort of did, but it added in extra bullet points and things I didn't want it. So I had to go away and reformat it. But again, it'll be quicker another time because I can give it the structure. And this is what it looked like. This is just from the paper here. My extra text at the top. We've got 8 categories: definition and structure, economic impact, workforce dynamics, and 5 more. And the descriptions. If you look at the paper, you will notice that I edited it a bit and I changed quite a few of the Z spellings to S to make this UK English, but I didn't get all of them. I did it quickly, so it's not completely consistent there. But this is not being submitted for publication. So that's another decent section of the paper done there. Okay, then another fresh window. So now the plan is to give the questions and answers, and to give these identified themes back to ChatGPT and ask it to classify the questions against the themes. The kind of thing a human would do. ChatGPT generally does a reasonable job with classifications because it's a very good language tool here. It doesn't guarantee we would get exactly the same themes as a human, but I've not generally got any complaints. And we got a table back. Again, it had to have a bit of reformatting because it managed to generate a LaTeX table with ticks in there. I had to replace them all with X's because a tick symbol does not do very well here. I also had to do things like turn the labels vertically so they would fit in the page. But again, something quite neatly laid out. And we can look at it and we can see, yeah, it looks reasonably sensible. What is the gig economy and how can one participate in it? That definitely has a definition in it. About gig economy and people earning money, well, that's definitely about economic impact, and you can certainly argue it's about workforce dynamics and so on. I did not go and systematically check all of these, but they seem to make a reasonable amount of sense. And remember that this classification should also be based on the answers, which aren't shown in this table. I did the same for the ChatGPT generated versions as well. I then asked it to draw a chart comparing the number of questions in each category. Now, the problem with this is that, unfortunately, this is hallucination. These numbers are completely wrong there. And there are ways I could get it to count itself. I probably should have got it to count before asking it to generate the code, so it had the numbers there, and it had the numbers as it generated the tables, but I didn't do that. So the quickest solution was I just quickly counted these up myself, put the numbers in an Excel spreadsheet, copied them across, and got it to generate a graph. And I also asked it to use a better color scheme than the previous slide, and things like I had to get it to ask this scale to not try and put in half points, which didn't make any sense because you only have whole numbers of questions. But we got a comparison, and the numbers are roughly equivalent, which is interesting. Clearly, with a sample size of 10, then you're going to get a 10% deviation in many cases, but the biggest one was definition and structure. That Quora itself gave many more questions in this category in the top 10. ChatGPT didn't there. And I did prompt that information that I'd spotted myself into ChatGPT later on. But a nice figure there for this. I then asked ChatGPT to take this information. I pasted a lot of this back in. And to write a discussion section and write a conclusion section here. And it did a passable job, but the discussion section was a bit short, so I prompted this also by giving it the definitions and asking it to write a discussion about each of these classifications as well, or these themes, as I called it. And I had enough information then I could copy and paste into the paper, and a pretty good job by that point there. There was very little else I had to do other than I just edited it and made sure there were a few acknowledgements to ChatGPT and there's a bit of methodology. I did spend a while not used in the paper asking ChatGPT go away and experiment and come up with some new ideas of your own to include in the paper, completely unnecessary. That's for my own fun. It came back, of course, with a completely different set of categories at this point, as it will do, because you can categorize things in multiple ways. I was not completely convinced, though, that having another set of categories would be that much use. It came up with interesting word clouds as well. And they do make some kind of sense. It also came up with a nice description of these word clouds and mentioned things like the original core answers mentioned sites like Uber. They're not included in the ChatGPT generated answers, but there were some odd things I looked at in this, like you may spot in the Quora word cloud. The word economy somehow appears twice, and how you manage to get the same word twice in a word cloud is difficult. For that, I could see you might get sometimes you get a plural form and a singular form there, so I wasn't completely convinced, but otherwise there are words like gig and economy keep appearing. I guess I didn't think of this at the time. Perhaps it was processing gig economy as a bigram, a two-word phrase or something like that. But anyway, this is the kind of thing that you could just make your paper look a little bit more polished by adding some word clouds or adding some other kind of discourse analysis, but not necessary for my purpose of demonstration there. But interesting to include this and to see the kind of things that are possible. A lot of things ChatGPT tried to do, it timed out as well. So when I say 6.5 hours, there's probably another half hour wasted just messing around with things like this and waiting for ChatGPT to complete. I also decided I'd have a nicer title as well. ChatGPT gave me some very boring suggestions, so I just provided a little bit more information about what the paper was really about, because it seemed to want to write about gig economy in general, and it came up with some quite nice titles. I went with one of those in the end for that there, and I also added a little bit of a acknowledgement once I worked out how to do it in LaTeX against my author, to without directly saying that some of this written by ChatGPT there that it's a demonstration of how ChatGPT can be used to enhance research studies. I hope people do not take this seriously and think that even though I've edited it and I think it's reasonably sensible within the idea of what I could do in a few hours, this is not peer-reviewed research for this there. Whether I ever cite this, assuming it gets accepted as a preprint, as an example of how papers can be generated, I'm sure I may refer to it in talks and things like that. Who knows? Because of course I could produce many more of those. And we ended up with the paper which you saw here. And the LaTeX looks quite different. I had to include all these packages I didn't think about at the end. Just do silly things like a URL package because I was getting error messages from the list of references which had URLs in them and everything like that. But reasonably happy with what this looked like at the end of the process. And so that was how I went from having an idea and a concept and trying to do something vaguely related to what I'd seen online to having a paper with a relatively catchy title. The only way it could be more keyword optimized would be gig economy at the start, but this keyword and search engine optimization way of doing things is, I think, a big driver to this production line research. So I want to conclude just with a few thoughts about research integrity and how people may be largely setting up a process where they can publish papers like this one en masse there. And essentially what you could do is you could choose a niche to target. If I really wanted to be known for the business field or something like that, I could base this on gig economy or outsourcing or something like that. Even better, and I've got my work on professional practices, some of you may know, professional presences, that you could set up a website as well, so you could always refer to your website, which you then suddenly become an expert because you publish lots of papers in Google Scholar, which is considered a reputable source for backlinks that people will find your site. You may be invited to speak and have other opportunities. But I could close it. But even if I don't do that and I just want to publish papers, because I know some countries you are paid based on the number of papers you publish and things like that, there I could choose the niche, I could then identify related keywords, and I could produce comparison papers targeting these related keywords, all of which link back to my original paper on the gig economy or whatever it might be as a reference, because that one has a proven methodology now in there. And they can just be published as preprints, but if some of them get into journals, then even better. And the more I automate this and I automate bringing in other papers, then the better it is. What else could I do that's a bit more advanced? I could automate it. I could automate collecting related papers. I deliberately did this using ChatGPT. There are better tools and AI tools for scraping. There are better tools for summarizing research papers as well out there other than ChatGPT. I could also write a script and go through the GPT 3.5 or GPT-4 API, and I could certainly pull a first draft together much more quickly. Now, that would be a couple of days of programming, which I don't really have time to do for purposes purely of demonstration, but it is quite doable. I could also vary the comparison techniques, so I don't always compare Quora with ChatGPT. I could compare different sites, different services with one another, and that would also allow me, if I wanted, to do another paper about the gig economy, because I could compare it with something different, or I could say, well, this is an updated version, or I could compare it with more than 10 results. Now, the real fast way of doing a lot of this is to bring on a paid third party, a paid writer, probably in a country where the economy means they work relatively cheaply, and this wouldn't need to cost a great deal of money, and they could do a lot of this themselves. Sometimes it's still cheaper to bring in another human than it is to try and automate things, particularly if you want to cover a wider variety of sites for that. And of course I could cover some of these costs by selling authorship spaces on my paper. If I wanted, I could also sell citations in the paper as well for that. As we know many people do, of course, the whole field of research integrity goes far deeper than that, or probably a lack of research integrity, where you can have links with particular journals and have agreements with particular reviewers to make sure your paper gets accepted. You even set up your own journal. There are all kinds of things you can do as part of this process there. But I hope it's giving you an idea about what is possible. To me, this whole idea of using ChatGPT as part of research is not dangerous. And I managed to get an image out with correct spelling, which is very unusual with generative AI for that there. But there's nothing wrong with using ChatGPT as a research assistant and acknowledging it. How far you need to acknowledge it, the rules will vary from journal to journal and from publication to publication. But to me, it does a very good job of basic classifications and thematic analysis and content analysis. But where it gets dangerous are these production line papers that are published without very much in the way of an oversight, and they're treated as fact, or they're put inside services like Google Scholar as if these were as if these are fully accepted and reputable sources. And as you may have noted at the very beginning of this talk, when I showed you examples of some publications of this type, they're very quickly getting a lot of citations to them, because this whole field of medical research and other research areas are building. These people are citing one another, or sometimes self-citing, because the same names appear again and again and again. And so many of these metric-based measures for the quality of research and the reach of research are not necessarily worth thinking about, considering as being particularly serious. So thank you for joining me. That's my story of how I put together an academic paper. I could do this again. I could do this in the academic integrity field. I could even do this in the research integrity field. I could do this a lot quicker, second time around, particularly if I was willing to go and rewrite a lot of it, because this text is largely directly from ChatGPT. As is much of the discussion, it had a bit of light editing for that, and the references need a bit more work. But I think what you have here is a good indication of what is possible. So that is it. The gig is up, and that is what I have to say about generating research papers semi-automatically with human insight. But people out there can and are doing a lot more. Thank you for watching.